Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Bree Reynolds. I'm the Career Development Manager at FlexJobs, and I am very excited to be hosting a panel today with some fantastic experts. And we're going to be talking about remote work, the future of work, and how we can all thrive in this changing dynamic time that we're finding ourselves in. So first of all, I would like to just make sure that everybody can see and hear us okay. So in the chat area on Zoom, if you would just give us a quick hello, maybe where you're coming in from today, that would be very helpful. Let's see, before we dive in, I do have some housekeeping to go over, and then I will introduce our panelists. And yes, it looks like people can hear us and see us. Looks great. We've got New York, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Louisiana, North Carolina, Ontario, Canada, Maryland. I try to keep up with the list, but it never works. You're all too fast. Florida, Texas, Wisconsin, Puget Sound, Michigan. Beautiful, all over the place. All right, looks like a good and active group. So let's go over some housekeeping, and then we will dive into who the panelists are and what we're going to be talking about today. So the webinar is scheduled to last about 60 minutes, and it will feature first a panel discussion that I'm going to moderate. So you'll be able to hear from all the panelists and get their perspectives on this specific topic. And then we're going to open it up for a Q&A with the audience. So if you have any questions throughout the conversation at any point in time, you can put them in the Q&A section on the Zoom control panel. And that helps me be able to see which questions are coming in. And it also gives you the opportunity to give a thumbs up to any questions that someone else asked that you would also like to hear the answer to. You can direct your question to a specific panelist, or you can leave it open-ended for everyone on the panel to answer if they have something to say. So the Q&A section is good for questions. Interaction in the chat is definitely recommended and welcome throughout the presentation. You can add your own ideas and thoughts about what's being discussed. I will also be adding some links into the chat for resources from our panelists today, so be on the lookout from those. The event is being recorded, and later this week, usually within a few days, an email is going to be sent to you that has a link to the recording and any of those links and resources that I shared in the chat. So let's see, I think that's about it as far as housekeeping goes. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm actually going to take down the screen share so that you can see them all a little bit better and make sure that we've got our gallery view on. Yes, we do. Okay, so, and all the panelists, if you could give a little wave when I introduce you, that would be great. So first up is Dr. Scott Beason, who actually, his new book inspired the conversation that we're having today. Scott is a professor of management and the Silberman Global Faculty Fellow at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And he's the author of The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work-Life, Wellness, and Employee Support, which was just released and is the inspiration, as I said, for our topic today. So hi, Scott, thanks for being here.
Hi, great to be here.
And we also have Steve Wynn, who is the VP and GM of U.S. Public Sector at Citrix, and he's also a workplace transformation specialist. As a leader in digital workspace and zero-based solutions, Steve is really passionate about enabling people to work from anywhere, which is an apt place to be right now. And Citrix was ranked number 13 in the most recent FlexJobs list of the top 100 companies for remote jobs. So Citrix is definitely one of the companies leading the way when it comes to remote work, the future of work, and flexible work options. So hi, Steve, thanks for being here.
Hi, Bree, thanks.
And then last but not least, but we have two more. So next up is Oscar Gonzalez, who is the Assistant Secretary for Administration in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And the USDA is committed to supporting its workforce with work flexibility. And it previously ranked number 8 on the FlexJobs list of the top 100 companies for remote work, among many other rewards and recognition the USDA has received for workplace flexibility. Oscar, thank you so much for being here today. And last but certainly not least, there is Mika Cross, who is a federal workplace expert and hybrid workplace transformation strategist. She has more than 20 years of public service with assignments throughout the U.S. intelligence community as a strategic workforce advisor for the U.S. government, and as a veteran of the U.S. Army, and as the VP of Employer Engagement at FlexJobs, which is how we know each other. So Mika, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Bree.
All right, so it looks like our chat has calmed down a little bit. We are ready to begin. So let's dive in. I have a few topics that I wanted to toss to the panel to discuss today. I will be calling on a specific person to get it started, but if anyone else wants to weigh in, please feel free. So the first one is just defining what a whole person workplace is. What is this concept that has brought us together today and what that looks like in practice? So Scott, since you wrote the book on it, in a nutshell, could you just give us the essential definition of a whole person workplace and what are some of the hallmarks that make it easier to actually identify one of those organizations if you're on the lookout for a new company or a place to work?
Great, thank you. So the whole person workplace, the title came out of my interviews with about 40 or 50 organizations all during the pandemic, and these companies, good companies that really care about their employees, how they were navigating, how do we support our employees through this? They weren't just looking at the bottom line, they were also looking at how do we build and create a workplace culture that can get us through this and sustain us and make sure everybody's okay. So really the whole person workplace is how workplaces or employers can value employees. Some workplaces value employees as like part of the machine and don't really value them much at all. Others value them as like assets, which like is good, except like we invest in an asset just so it returns to us. So we'll burn you out with long weeks and hard work, but then we'll give you a wellness program so that you can come back and work hard for us again, right? And that's kind of this investment model, and that's better than being part of the machine, but it's not everything it could be. And so, in my research of looking at, positive supportive workplaces, almost universally, they're valuing their employees as whole people with lives outside of work, commitments, responsibilities, stressors, and also a desire to bring some of themselves into work as well and be engaged and really be kind of fully there when they're there. And so that's kind of the concept of the whole person workplace. And then how does it play out and what does it look like? Well, that depends on the workplace. So I interviewed, organizations as small as a corner convenience store to multinational corporations. And so how they make these values real really differs, right? So large companies can have extensive parental leave and workplace flexibility solutions and really invest in their IT solutions and have childcare support and wellness programs and very formal policies and programs all over the place. Smaller employers rely a little more on informal accommodations, customized solutions based on really knowing and adjusting to the needs of their workforce. So how it plays out varies incredibly, but there's some markers you could look towards, and then that was the second part of the question, which for job seekers, and I think most of the people here today are job seekers, and we'll talk about this a little later on, but you want to look at does this organization offer a wide range of benefits programs that are appropriate for a wide range of employees, because not everybody has the same needs or concerns. People coming right out of college might be drowning in student debt. There's things organizations can do about that. Working parents have, there's a set of supports that we can have for them. Other people who might have elder care issues or financial concerns or physical or mental health and well-being, concerns about their safety at the workplace, desire to volunteer, desire to develop and grow professionally and educationally. There's lots of different things they could do, but I think we'll talk a little bit later, so I'm going to cut off my discussion here about what you could do during your job search to better sort through potential employers to see which ones have a better shot at being a whole person workplace and those that don't. The last thing I will say is many of these whole person workplaces that I interviewed, when the pandemic hit, right, and work went remote or had to be adjusted significantly, or they had to put a lot of safety measures in place, they were like 10 steps ahead because they had already built a flexible workplace culture that didn't just tolerate workplace flexibility, but had embraced it previously, and also had built culture of mutual care. So people stepped up for each other, and employers thought more creatively about how we can keep the lights on, but also make sure everybody's going to be okay through this horrible 18 months of stress, anxiety, and loss that we've all experienced.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's such a good definition. And you've already had some people in the chat saying they'd love to work for a place like that. And when you were talking about burnover and being, yeah, yes, wouldn't we all? being a cog in the machine. That's how high turnover happens, somebody mentioned. So yeah, I think we all kind of have a sense of, in general, what this might look like. And I think your point about it being very specific to the individual person and what that whole person looks like is a really good one. So let's actually go to Steve, who works for an organization who has been doing this well since before the pandemic. So Steve, I mentioned before that Citrix is a top 100 company for remote jobs, and the past 18 months or so must have tested those remote work programs. And as Scott mentioned, being a company that was already set up to work that way in many ways must have helped. But in what ways has Citrix changed or evolved its focus on creating that people-focused culture during the last year or so? Any new things that you've learned or old practices that you found really helpful?
Yeah, thanks, Bree. So I would say that, I give all the credit to the employees and all the teams, right? Because it's really the culture that's made us thrive during this time. Being, that remote work is in our culture, in our DNA. And then with the pandemic, is taking that to 150%, right? How do we manage through that? What we saw, and I think, talking to a lot of our industry partners and everything, people were concerned about how will people work, right? A lot of people were concerned about efficiencies and everything of employees working at home. What we saw was, at least with our team, it was because we had the tools in place, obviously Citrix and so forth. But what we saw was people actually worked harder. People turned on their devices at 7 a.m. and they worked to 9, 10 o'clock at night, and they never took breaks. So we didn't see a drop in efficiency. We saw an increase in efficiency. And what we were concerned about most and how we evolved was really worrying about our employees' well-being, the mental health, right? It is like, how do we make sure that employees are taking breaks? How do we make sure that employees are, making sure that they're taking time with their families and with their friends and things outside of work? Because, we were seeing people working day and night. We were seeing people work on the weekends. And it was a lot of mission-focused work that was getting done, which is really great too. So that was really important. So where we changed, where we evolved really, was we took a much more emphasis on the mental health of our employees, right? And making sure that we had the programs and the tools to prevent burnout. So we gave them a lot of tools. We gave them, outside and sources to go to, 800 numbers to call, folks that they could talk to, so that they made sure that there's a different outlet for them to, deal with the anxiety of not just, work, but the pandemic and the family and, kids at home, and you had to work and so forth. And really having that tolerance of having, people, either being on video or not on video, having the kids on their laps when they're doing, work calls and everything was really important. And really, allowing that flexibility in our folks, right? The other thing we did too is we saw that, when people took time off, it wasn't really time off, especially during this time period. So we instituted a company-wide PTO, which we saw was actually very, beneficial. So, a lot of times what happens is people would go on vacation, but you're still, dealing with work issues, or, there's things that come up and you're dealing with that. So outside of customer, concerns and customer issues that come up, we did a company-wide PTO in 2020. We did it again this year in 2021. We see it going forward because not only did it help with the mental wellness of our employees, a lot of employees liked it. They liked the fact that they were gone. They felt more restful when they came back, and they felt more productive when they came back, because it was truly a week off of everything, unless you had some sort of customer emergency or something, right? It was a true week off where you weren't harassed or felt guilty, which is really a big thing when people take, some time off, is the guilt factor and all that. So we felt like that was actually really important. The other thing we did too was we did a lot of communications. We did a lot of communications of what our plan was for re-entry into the office. And we said that, hey, we don't know what's going on. The pandemic is just as everyone else. These are our current plans, and we'll communicate these plans to you on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. We had our global employee meetings with our executive team every quarter, and kept people up to date of what the plan was of returning to the office, what the phases were. And then we also told them things are going to change, because as the environment changes, we're going to change with it. So it wasn't rigid, hard in stone. So our return to office has been pushed, on and on and on, especially now with the variant that's out there, unfortunately. And that gives the employees some piece of what's going on. They're not sitting there every day stressing, I don't want to return to the office. They can return to the office soon. That creates another layer of stress that we're trying to take off the table for a lot of our employees. And the last thing we did, really, not the last thing, but one of the other things we did, we gave a stipend to a lot of our employees to work at home. because they had to set their office. We wanted to make sure they had either if you want an ergonomic chair or basically a bigger monitor or whatever it was, right? That we gave the employees a stipend to be able to make their work at home as comfortable as it could be, like it was at the office. And then one of the last things we did, which was actually very interesting, very helpful. I'm sorry, was we did a lot of frequent employee surveys. And in fact, I just filled one out this morning where we asked a lot of questions of how just how are you doing, mentally. That's like the first question, like how are you doing through this pandemic? Is there anything you need, rate it 1 to 5, so we can get a sense of our programs working, where employees are, and so forth, right? So those are some of the things we did just to make sure that we kept up the communications with employees. We were extremely flexible with the employees and created an environment where people, felt like they felt safe talking about some of the challenges and so forth working in this environment.
Yeah, I think all of what you've said is so important. And what comes to mind, I work on the career coaching team at FlexJobs, is all of these things are questions that people can be asking in their job search. And I know we're going to talk about that later, but it really is not off limits to ask, what has your company done over the last year to support its employees? And Scott, it looks like you have a comment to make too.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think, Bree, you make a great point. And Steve, and for everybody listening, this is exactly kind of what I'm talking about, right? A workplace that listens, right? A workplace that considers the needs and the stressors of their employees and that communicates, right? Up front, we don't have all the answers. Things are changing, but we're gonna, we're taking your concerns into consideration while we make decisions about our workplace, and caring about the mental well-being and the stress and the anxiety. And that's what the best employers can do is, take some measures to say, I could just be a good employer, or I can really try to take a little bit more responsibility in helping you in not just at work, but how work fits in with the rest of your life. So I think Citrix, from what Steve was talking about, is a great illustration of that. And again, like Bree said, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about how you can build your job search in a way that maybe you're more likely to work at a place like Steve's than at somewhere else's.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this actually ties in really nicely to our next topic on how organizations are adjusting to the pandemic and the future of work, and some more details about that. And specifically going to Oscar at the USDA, what Steve mentioned before about communicating, about bringing people in, and then what Scott mentioned about really getting to know the people that you're working with and what their expectations might be and things like that. The USDA has been doing something really interesting, making it a priority to engage workers across the globe to ensure that people feel supported in the planning for the future of work, and specifically re-entry and then post-entry into physical workspaces. So can you talk more about what the USDA has been doing in terms of engaging its workforce in the actual planning for returning to work?
Sure thing. Well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is one of the federal entities that communities, families, and households really depend on. The federal family is going through this major transformation. And what we're trying to do at USDA is to lead the way. The White House, the Office of Management and Budget, they really are providing great parameters. But because we're so unique in what we do, 100,000 employees. We have county offices all over the country. 1/3 of all of our employees actually were not able to telework because they're fighting fires, they're inspecting meat, and they're doing some other functions. So having a broad-based message sometimes can be difficult. But what Secretary Vilsack did in coming back, one, he recognized that employee morale was down. He recognized that the previous administration had pulled back workplace flexibilities to the point where workers were leaving in droves. So what we set out to do was to first listen. I like what I'm hearing from my co-panelists, is because it is about making sure that we are taking in from the employees what it is that management can do better. So the secretary, after understanding the importance of telework and bringing back to allowing, which is our current policy, that if you work for USDA, you will have the ability, if your supervisor approves, the ability to work 8 days per pay period, which is 8 days out of every 2 weeks. That's not bad. It's a good starting point for us. From that, we wanted to make sure that HR officials and the supervisors understood what we are gearing up for when we prepare to come back to work. We also did things like issue frequently asked questions so that employees knew really how we were going to be making this transition and also that they're supervisors. We also did a number of town hall forums where Secretary Vilsack himself went to every single agency or cluster of agencies to clearly communicate what our plans were. One, we have to carry out this important mission. We feed a hungry nation. We make sure that farmers and ranchers stay in business. We make sure that that children, looking for school meals, that they have what they need. But we can't do it without our workers. So we are now setting out department-wide working groups just to make sure that employees are able to provide input. We did a first-of-a-kind survey out of 100,000 employees. We had 54,000 employees who responded on how they envision worker reentry, the kinds of stress levels that they're dealing with, the kind of tools that they need, what their expectations were from workplaces coming back. We've already, quite frankly, started to see an uptick of people starting to believe in their jobs once again. The reality is this: USDA has to bring its A game if we're going to recruit the best and brightest. I understand there's over 500 plus people who dialed in. To me, this is like the best forum for me to be able to communicate not only about opportunities in the federal government, but at places like USDA. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Oscar. Yeah, I think sometimes it is a little bit counterintuitive. When people are thinking about who might be the most flexible workplaces, we still hear from people that it's, small startups, very small organizations, but really as USDA and Citrix are showing, these large organizations are really leading the way in that forward thinking and momentum of bringing people into it. And Mika, I wasn't sure if you spoke up there and I missed it. Okay, cool.
I just wanted to mention that also, Oscar is representing the nation's largest employer, not just a large employer. And he mentioned also that, the Department of Agriculture has 100,000 employees around the country and also around the globe. Those employees reside typically in offices all around the country, like 3,000 of them. They're in hometown USA, they're in rural America. And so what his and Secretary Vilsack's vision is around being able to bring more access and diversity to their workforce by giving access to different kinds of flexibilities is just amazing to watch. It's a great example for other employers. Of course, employers like Citrix are already kind of leading the way in the private industry side of the house, but it's just such a great example to lead the way as a model employer for the rest of the nation.
Yes, very well said. Yep. I think it's really true. It's employers also learn from other employers. And so when they see, organizations like themselves doing this sort of thing, it's a little bit competitive, but also a little bit inspirational that you're going to want to try doing those same things. Absolutely. And I see some of the chat going on, and thank you, Scott and Steve, for responding to some folks in the chat. That's great. Love the dual conversations going on here. Okay, so to bring Steve back into this a little bit, regarding the before and after pandemic changes at Citrix specifically, what do you think was most important for your team to manage during the pandemic? I know you talked about that burnout factor and the stress and anxiety of working during a pandemic. And then how do you see the benefits panning out for the future? So, at this point, having gone through this much of the pandemic, at least knowing that you're supporting that wellness, that you have those PTO weeks for where everyone is off, what does the future look like for Citrix in terms of workplace wellness?
Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate the question. I wanted to answer one of the questions in the chat, which is really how do you instill trust? I think from a trust standpoint, I think, what's good about remote work, well, one of the things you have to do about remote work is, for your team and for the employees, is to really set the goals and the metrics, right? So, instead of measuring by, whether or not how many hours you put in, because I think, many employees actually put in more than enough hours there in a day as it is, right? On weekends and everything too. So I think the biggest thing is really, to instill an organization that says, hey, these are the metrics that we're gonna, that we're trying to achieve. These are the metrics that the team wants to achieve, and then basically measure against that, and that helps form that trust that things are getting done and things are going the way you want them to go. One of the things that we saw also that was really important too is that, outside of doing the things we did, one of the things that was interesting is that we had to figure out, how we create a sense of a team, because sometimes you lose that, right? When everyone's remote, everyone's working individually and everything. Like, how do you bring the team together remotely? So we try to come up with new and creative ways to do, happy hours and so forth, or everyone, got together, at 4 o'clock on video and had a beverage or two together. Trying to start every single meeting with a, kind of like a water cooler talk, right? So, one of the things I did was every single meeting that I hosted, I spent the first 10 minutes and everyone knew that, the first 5 to 10 minutes of Steve's meeting was basically, just, hey, how's everyone doing? What's going on? Just trying to get the water cooler talk going, to really instill a sense of a team, right? And that's what's really important too, is people feel like there's a team that they're working for and everything. And one of the most important things, during managing this pandemic is really keeping the team focused on, why are you working so hard? Why are you here? What are you doing? Luckily for us at Citrix, one of our biggest things we're doing is really helping a lot of our customers in the government get home and be able to work at home safely, right? So that was really our big why, was we were actually helping during the pandemic, people getting home, working remotely in a safe and secure environment. So that's really important for us. For what the outcome was of all this is basically, the outcome we want, whether or not we're in a pandemic or not, whether we're working remotely or not, which is basically a happy employee base, right? And that's the outcome, right? That's the biggest outcome for us is having a, for me especially, is having a team that is happy to be working at Citrix or wherever your the employer is, and because happy employees do more work, get more done, and more efficient, right? And the other thing that comes out of that is happy employees don't leave, so you have lower retention. And the third thing is you can, happy employees, if they're friends, work here also, right? Which is really important too. So being able to get to that, to that bigger base of available employees out there is really important for us too. Is we're constantly, every corporation like USDA is always growing and have a lot of jobs out there. Attracting people is really big too. So the more that we do these things, the more happy our employees are because of the things we're doing around, employee happiness and welfare and everything else. It's going to attract other employees to our company. So I think that's the biggest thing we got out of doing all these things, was that.
I think those are some of the most important things that you mentioned, that, as we talk about this, a lot of it's focused on how the employees can benefit, but there are so many benefits for the company, the organization at the same time. And actually, if we could just jump to one of the Q&As, I think one of the questions that came in is really related to that. And it's really about, and Scott, you might have some research on this from your book. How do workplaces see the benefits to them in this situation? So for companies that are doing this and doing it well, what do companies see as the benefits? I know, Steve, you outlined, reduced turnover, increased happiness, productivity, efficiency, and then also being able to attract talent because of this. I don't know, Scott, in your researching the book, did any other benefits come up from the employer side, in case anyone's looking to talk about this in their current place of employment and sort of convince people?
Well, those are the big ones, but also, turnover and things like that, but also resiliency. There's going to be more disruptions in the future, hopefully not as bad as this one, but it'll keep you agile if you're good at listening and adjusting and having flexibility as part of your DNA. But finally, I talk, the managers and leaders who are doing these things, they say that going to work is easier. There are fewer problems. There's less stress in the workplace. There's less strife in the workplace. There's less conflict in the workplace. When you built a culture where people feel psychologically safe and therefore can be more supportive of others as well. So that's a little intangible, but I think that's something that I picked up on loud and clear.
Absolutely. And Mika, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few other details in addition to what Scott mentioned, and also just kudos to Steve and his team for making those investments in overall well-being and that focus on the whole person. There are both direct and indirect costs to employers who get this right. So some direct costs can look like increased costs and healthcare benefits. I mean, that directly affects your bottom line. Payouts and disability claims, potentially workers' compensation cases, and those sorts of things. It's estimated, I put this in the chat too, that the cost of attrition is estimated at between 150% and 250% of one employee's annual salary. So if I leave your organization, think about the cost to productivity, continuity, and the impact to the mission. So it does pay dollar and cents to get this right as well. And that discretionary effort, I mean, the nation's largest employer and the Office of Personnel Management have strong linkages between high perceptions of employee engagement, that psychological safety factor that Scott was talking about, and the impact to an employee's perception of how long they'll stay in an organization, how much effort they give towards the bottom line, and even establishing those really strong, important relationships on behalf of the customers, which are the American public, who are taxpayers, all of us who are funding that mission. So there are real tangible benefits to doing this, both for private industry and for the public sector.
If I can add something, I really like this point. Those are excellent points, Mika. I think a larger, so we were just talking about what's in it for the employers. I also think it has to be what's in it for the policymakers. How can they start to take a look? You know, people forget that what really kickstarted the telework movement in the United States was President Obama's Telework Act. And it really helped Mika and I, when we worked together, to go to supervisors at USDA to say, this is the law. The law is requiring a certain number of things. I also feel that if we're a nation that really believes in, let's just say, nation building, you have to start off with community building. I strongly believe that if you can have employees not be on the road so long, so that they can go out and coach Little League, they can go out and volunteer in their church, they can go out and check up on the elderly couple. Those are the things that start to build up our nation block by block. You know, I'm like probably a lot of people on this call, where I think it was mostly government workers that coached me, that tutored me, that kind of helped get me, you know, off of the streets, basically. And so I really feel making a compelling argument to both employers and those that they are very beholden to, which are policymakers, the politicians that end up deciding what their budgets look like. So I think it's a holistic conversation that we have to have.
I think you're right. As it was mentioned before, you know, being the country's largest employer, when a mandate like that goes out that has real backing behind it and makes a big difference in that area, a lot of other private sector companies, you know, look to that and say, okay, maybe this is something we need to be doing as well. Right. And I remember being back at FlexJobs, that was just a few years before we were founded, and that was a big deal. I mean, that was the first big signal from a very large organization that telework was important and necessary. And it really did make a shift in what we saw employers on the whole doing. Because it was, oh yeah, Mika, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on one other thing, and to Oscar's point too, is that, I mean, look at the people on this panel. These are leaders of organizations at the highest of levels, and they walk the walk and they talk the talk. And I think that in addition to having those policies and the infrastructure there, allowing people to participate in them without having hidden biases or inequities around who gets access to what kinds of flexibility is incredibly important to level the playing field. Because let's consider the pandemic and the impact it's had on working mothers or working parents or caregivers or those with disabilities. But, you know, it's estimated that more than $3 million in turnover costs and labor shortages for working women in the workplace who also play a role as a parent. It's just impacted the country in so many important ways. So even taking a look at the access and equity and who's endorsing these policies. I mean, look at Oscar, look at Steve. These are individuals who are leading huge, large teams, and they believe in it. They are speaking about it, and they walk the walk and talk the talk. And I think for employers who are looking to get this right, you need people who will participate in it and endorse it, and also give other leaders a sense of empowerment that they can do it as well and make the right decisions for their teams.
Yes, indeed, which actually segues really nicely. Mika, I wanted to talk to you too with our third topic. This is where we're really going to get to the nitty gritty, the things that if you are on this call and you're a job seeker, whether you are passively or very actively looking for a job, and you want to find employers who do this and do it well. In your experience, Mika, as a workforce, transformation specialist with hybrid and remote work, how can you identify companies that actually implement whole person workplaces in different ways? Every company does it a little bit differently, but how do you identify those as a professional who wants that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm seeing so many in the chat around how you identify those kinds of positions that offer remote jobs or flexible ways of working. I think the most important thing to start with is take an inventory on what's most important to you first before you look for that technical position. And the reason I say that is because only you know what kind of culture will fit for you. The better the fit, the longer term benefit is for you, but also the employer who is hiring you. For instance, if you go into a position of law enforcement that traditionally does not allow, because they have to be physically on premise, that might not be a good fit if you are a working mother and need a little flexibility to get your child to daycare in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon. So kind of taking a personal inventory first on what your needs and preferences are, in addition to looking at your skills, your expertise, your background, and how that might align with the kind of position that you're looking for. The second thing I'll mention is how you started off, Bree, which was giving recognition to Steve's organization, Citrix, and also the USDA around the kinds of awards and recognition publicly and on a national scale that they've earned. I like to do a bit of research and looking for those organizations who, if I'm looking for a telework friendly or remote friendly position, might have already been positioned as a pioneer in that space and have been working, remote first, digital first. But also FlexJobs has a number of accolades that you can sort and filter on. So imagine you're a military spouse, and by virtue of your transient lifestyle and your support of your loved one, you need a fully remote position. On the FlexJobs site, you can not only look for that category of flexibility, which would be fully remote or virtual work from anywhere kind of position, but you can also filter on organizations that have been recognized by the Department of Defense as military spouse employment program friendly kinds of employers. Same goes for diversity or best places to work for women or Hispanics or students. So it's really worth your time to take an inventory personally on what would be a fit for you, in addition to those technical skills matches, and know where and how to look. And Bree, there was one other question I just wanted to mention. I know I'm kind of being long-winded, but it is important to consider all of the potential scammers that are out there, especially in the remote jobs market. Typically, what is the estimates now? Is it almost 60%? Bree, you know better than I.
Yeah, I know the stat right off the top of my head. It is only 1 out of every 60 to 70 work from home jobs that are posted are real jobs. So 1 out of the 60 to 70 jobs posted are actually real work from home jobs, and the rest are scams. Some of which are very obvious, but some are very sneaky.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, because it is really important information to consider as you start your job search, especially for the remote piece. In addition, it's highly competitive. It's likely that you might see 3 or 4 times the amount of candidates for those kinds of positions than you would in a traditional brick and mortar job. So just being aware and understanding the resources that are available to get you spun up before you even start putting pen to paper. We don't really put pen to paper anymore, but you know what I mean, in a digital capacity, just to get your job search on the right track. And Bree and her team has amazing resources available that are free and available, from webinars to resource guides and all of those things.
Thank you, Mika. Thanks for the shout out. And Scott, just to kind of bring you into this part of the conversation, a lot of this discussion is about what organizations can do for workers, but are there lessons to be learned here for how workers can support each other as well? So even if you are actively job searching for something new on a team where you currently exist, what could you be doing to kind of see the whole person in your teammates? Or if you're a manager who's running a whole team, what can you do at a more individual level to enact some of these things that you've been researching and that are in the book?
Can I be slightly political and get to that question in just a second? I want to follow up
Sure.
on what Mika was just saying. So yeah, there's lots of things you can do in your job search, right? So Mika suggests, I think sorting through FlexJobs is a great place to go. But there's for large employers, right? You go to the Fortune lists and go through Glassdoor. Find people who work at certain places on LinkedIn, see who who knows somebody there, and see if you get some inside scoop. So you could do some due diligence up front. Most mid to large employers have sites where they show what their benefits are and their benefits packages, and that could give you an idea, although it's coming from them, so it's not quite as good as like the reviews on Glassdoor and things like that, which are really coming from employees and are anonymous. But when you're in a job interview or you're networking with someone, you can ask the following questions. You can ask things like, so tell me, how did your workplace support employees during the pandemic? How did you help prevent burnout? Like in some of the examples that Steve was talking about before, what did you do to try to limit people's kind of work-life imbalance during this time? Can you tell me about a time that your employer, your work team really stepped up for somebody who had some problems in their personal life, and how did that resolve itself? Can you tell me about how your company is listening to employees as you're implementing your return to workplace strategy? These types of questions will be really good indicators, right? That these are workplaces that listen, that are empathetic, that are creative, that are open to alternative ways of working. So we can ask those questions in job interviews, turn it around on them a little bit. And if they can answer these questions with vigor and pride, that's a great, that's a great clue that this is a good workplace to work for. And if they're like, well, I know, if they can't answer it, right, that's a really good indicator too, that they might have some things on paper, but they might not have been living it. So those are some things from a job seeker point of view that I would really focus on. And even though the Whole Person Workplace, the book, is written a little more for managers, leaders, HR types, and employers, I do have sections on what individual contributors, and that's what Bree's question, I'm going to get to that in a second, was, and then also what job seekers can do to get themselves into these situations. So what individual contributors and employees can do for their coworkers. First off, be supportive. It's easier to be like, make yourself the victim of the story. It's like, this employee had to go on parental leave and now I'm stuck with a little more work. Now, your needs should be met too, and they should not overload you just because somebody else needed help. But are you the victim in this story, or could you be the hero in the story who decides hey, I'm going to support my coworker, and who, probably down the line, this is going to build a culture where I'll, when I need help with elder care or mental health or whatever else, that I'll be supported because I'm putting it out there and being role modeling some of this. There are ways to get involved in your workplace formally, task forces and diversity inclusion programs and employee resource groups that you can maybe have a hand in shaping a better workplace, right, in a formal manner. And then finally, role modeling. So if you are at an employer that, we kind of tolerate work from home or whatever, but maybe you could be a leader in standing up for it. Maybe you could be the person that emails your supervisor and says, respectfully, you're emailing the team at 11 o'clock at night and it's making people anxious that they have to check their emails all the time. Or, send out the out of office reply email that I am on vacation for these 2 weeks. I'll get back to you when I get back. There's no expectation for me to not, to cut short my vacation, to be always connected and things like that. So you could role model some of these things, right? And maybe those are things that we as individual contributors can do to make our workplace a whole person workplace, because it's not just what the bosses can do. It's, a great workplace culture involves everyone. The last thing I'll say for job seekers, once you get a job at a new place, hopefully they're onboarding you in a way that is not just like, here's your job responsibilities and sign off that you won't sexually harass somebody. They should, really orient you to the culture. They should introduce you widely through the organization, and that you could do this remotely or not. And there's lots of creative ways to do this. And these are good early indicators that an organization really gets it from a culture standpoint. And with that, I'll shut up and let other people go. Thanks.
No, I think I can see our audience kind of furiously taking notes for all of these questions to ask and indicators for this. And I just wanted to open up to Oscar and Steve as well, from your experiences, recruiting and hiring candidates in flexible and supportive work environments. And maybe, I don't know what happened previously in your careers, maybe less supportive environments. What do you wish candidates would ask about during job interviews? And even if it's not that asking about it, what would you say are the indicators if they're looking at the USDA careers pages or Citrix's, careers pages? How can they assess what that organization is doing from the outside before they actually get through the doors or the virtual doors to talk to someone? Oscar, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I think finding indicators, such as what is the future of office space looking like? What kind of collaborative environments do people have? The federal government is got to respond to this move towards flexible work schedule. It's just a dollars and cents kind of an effort. Even before COVID, the federal government was grappling with all of this excess space. We at USDA, we believe that we're also leading the charge on that front. A big question that's been coming up is, well, Oscar, what happens if a new administration comes in and they want to roll back, telework policy? Well, there are some that feel that if we can make good use of our space, making it so that there's morale could be lifted, people could feel good, that we have all of the amenities that employees look for, whether it's childcare, cafeterias, workout rooms. I think that is also something to ask for. I believe that, I believe that it is an applicant market right now, at least when it comes to the federal government. I feel that the federal government, really the jury is still out. You have a lot of ups and downs and change of administration. We know that the demands on the public, we kind of know what's a good conversation starter when you're at the, at the local park talking to your friends. It's always cooler. And by the way, I've worked for a startup and I worked for a Fortune 500 company. So when you talk about working in government, unless it's like a NASA or unless it's like a, some other cutting edge. So I really feel that the federal government is trying to put its best foot forward. So never hesitate. You as an applicant out there, never hesitate to ask the question that will then get to you on whether that's the place that you want to be.
I think that's such very good points. And over to Steve too.
Hey, thanks. So I think, my comment is basically for me, and I think from a lot of different leaders that are out there, employers that are out there, we want employees to stay with the company as long as possible, right? It doesn't do us any good for employees to come in for, a year or 2 years. We want employees to stay with us for, 5, 10, 15 years, right? Because, all the institutional knowledge and everything else. So, what I would say to, folks that are looking for jobs and talking to employers is basically, along the lines of what Scott said, right? Is to really be honest and frank and just ask the questions. I mean, if you were buying a house, you would ask 1,001 questions. You're investing your job here, which is your, at least 8 hours of your day away from your family and friends and all that kind of good stuff, right? Ask all the questions. Like Oscar said, right? I think right now it is an employee's market. So I would ask all the questions possible, be honest, and just say, these are my questions I have. And, one of the things that I always push during the interview process for either, myself or for anyone else is to ask to talk to peers, right? Talk to the peers and ask them the questions, because, you'll smoke it out of them, right? And ask them, hey, what's going on with this? How'd you do with this? Or, what have you? And they'll tell you what's going on too. So, an indicator is if the employer doesn't allow you to talk to your peers, that's like a big red flag right there, right? So I would say talk to peers, as well as ask all the questions you can, be honest and frank.
Yes, all excellent points. All right, so I think it's probably time to turn it over to the Q&A portion here. We've got a good amount of time. So I am going to start with a question it's sort of a general one that we get a lot, but I think in this, this overarching idea that we have here of looking at the whole person and the future of work, this is going to be one of those questions that gets more and more pronounced. And it has to do with older applicants, older workers, and where they fit into all of this too. Because as Scott mentioned at the beginning, there are, every person has their own whole person package that they're kind of coming with, and their own challenges and opportunities in their own lives. And of course, on the coaching team, we hear from older workers all the time that it is a more difficult job market in general if you are an older worker. And that's across the board, not necessarily this particular job market, but in general. And so what tips or ideas do you have for an older worker when it comes to applying their skills and abilities in the future of work, in remote work, and making a good impression when they're applying to your organizations? I don't know, Mika's got her hand up there. Go ahead, Mika.
I really love this trend that I'm seeing in a lot of private sector organizations. So Oscar, this might be a fun one to try out at USDA if you have the opportunity, but it's this idea of returnships. And so returnship programs are really designed to try to attract more seasoned, I don't even necessarily want to call them older, but more seasoned, more experienced workers back to the workforce. And the purpose of that is not just on a technical basis, but also to fill in sort of that mentoring coaching role that might be having a gap in your organization if not done right, if succession planning is an issue, or if attrition, as we spoke about before, is affecting your workforce or pockets of your workforce in a different way. It's this wonderful concept about, offering different varieties of work schedules. It could be from part-time employment. It could be seasonal or a temporary term kind of position, or it could be full-time, long-term, remote work options. And the goal is to actually attract and recruit more seasoned older workers back to the workplace. So the first recommendation I'd have is to actually do a little more research, as I mentioned, to try to find those organizations and employers who are making investments in formal programs that typically they call returnship programs. There's companies like Delta, Dell, Steve, I'm not sure if Citrix is doing this yet, but it's a really great way to target employers who specifically have programs already designed and available for an older workforce. And the other thing is, if you are having any influence in maybe your own startup and you're looking to hire, or you're in an organization and you can help put forth these kinds of ideas as part of like an employee resource group or affinity groups, it's really a neat and innovative way to test out how you can get some more talent in the door. So those are my two top recommendations initially.
Awesome. And I'll give a chance if anybody else has anything to add in terms of older applicants, remote work, future of work, tips and techniques.
I'll put it out there. Federal government, look no further. I believe that you come in as a very strong applicant. If you bring that experience, that seasoning, that ability to drive, to mentor. I just find in the government, you're having, just this kind of institutional knowledge drain. And so if you have the experience, you have the capacity and the commitment, and you're on this call, but you also are a believer in flexible work schedules. So you actually bring, that really double bonus, in my opinion. I believe that anybody who is really looking for the next chapter in their career, you got to go to USA Jobs. You got to look at USDA opportunities. I believe that you bring a really extra edge to your process.
Yeah, and Oscar, you just mentioned USA Jobs. I'm going to put that link in the chat so that people can find that for federal hiring.
Absolutely. The process has been simplified. Again, you got to look at USDA. I'm just going to make another plug here. 100,000 employees. We got 20,000 vacancies to fill. That's right, 20,000 combination of temp workers, remote, all over the country, not just in Washington, D.C. A lot of great things happening on the USDA front.
That's great. The only thing, I would ditto everything that Oscar said, right? I mean, it's all about experience, and it's all about maturity, and it's all about being that, a person that other people can look to as a mentor, right? So I think all those are excellent points on that question. But we look at it, I look at it personally as that maturity, or folks that don't get frustrated and jump ship right away, right? So I look at it, when like myself, I'm hardened. I look at it as I'm hardened, right? Not older. I'm hardened, and you yell out more miles on me because I've seen the ups and the downs, and I can help manage through that, and that's what I would position for anyone that is at my age group and higher.
Yeah, and Steve, I think that's such a great point about also for the job seekers to approach this in a way that really shows why that's an asset, and that has confidence in the fact that you have experience and knowledge and that seasoning. I love that idea, and the hardening of really having gone through a lot of things in your career.
Right.
I think a lot of times people assume that that's going to be a disadvantage, and so they come with this different approach to the job search that's a little fearful, and that lack of confidence. And what we're always coaching people is to be confident in those abilities, to really use that to your advantage, because it can be an advantage if you seize it and you take control of it. And Scott, I think you're going to jump in.
Yeah, no, it's just, this all being said, and I think this is great, and we need to seek employers that have these this mindset. But the fact is, it's a tough job market for those who are 50 and over. There's a lot of age discrimination going on that's very hard to legally prove, but it's clearly going on. So I really do sympathize. And I think that it's not only wrong of employers to discriminate against people who are a little older, it is stupid to do so because you're passing on a lot of experience and people who really help you. And the fact is, in most organizations, people aren't staying more than 7 or 8 years anyway in many jobs. So hiring somebody who's 55 or somebody who's 25, you can hold on to them both as long as, is probable, right? So it infuriates me. This has affected people in my extended family. I don't have super great solutions for this besides what my co-panelists have said, but it really is a significant issue, and I wish more employers change their minds about these things.
Bree, I just wanted to add one other thing to consider, especially for job seekers. And that is, the federal government, including USDA, they actually have legal statutes to review and give what's called preference. They're not mandated to hire, but they're mandated to give preference in certain ways. So if you have individuals with qualifying disabilities or medical conditions, you can self-identify and often come in through a different application process because the government wants to diversify their talent. If you're a veteran, same thing. If you are a military spouse, there is executive orders that mandate that federal government agencies give preference to military spouses as well. So there are other hiring pathways that you can review and consider if you're applying to Oscar's jobs at USDA or other kinds of positions throughout the federal government. But then you have great employers like Steve's, who they have veteran hiring programs, and they have other kinds of specific kinds of pathways for different targeted groups that traditionally were underserved or had challenges and barriers to employment. So it is worthwhile to do your research.
Yes, I think a lot of times, I think this was said before, but a lot of times we try to jump into the process of job searching and get those resumes out there, but self-assessment and research ahead of time can save you tons of time and stress in the long run. So I'll stop that coaching for now. Let's get to another question here. One thing I was interested to hear from Scott, if this came up in researching your book and thinking about this topic, this one person saying there appears to be a high demand for employees, but it seems like employers, and this, I think it goes to the disparity of the jobs being offered versus the employees looking for work, or the job seekers looking for work, specifically the training piece that used to be long ago a key component to a lot of different jobs. On the job training, we often get questions from coaching applicants, from webinar attendees about whether or not remote jobs offer training. And typically the response has been no, but I wonder in the whole person workplace, is training something that employers are more open to? And it could be just ongoing professional development. Is that a piece of the puzzle here?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think that a lot of employers that have much of their work being remote work, they've been very creative about onboarding and orienting and things like that, but maybe not so much about job training. However, I think that it's easier than ever for employers to support employees with ongoing professional development. You could do LinkedIn learning classes. You as an organization can pay a couple $100 and get like a site license and sends a lot of your employees to get just upskills or professional certifications and things like that. It no longer really has to be like, I'm paying for your MBA and things like that. You could really have much more targeted spending and subsidizing for professional development and higher education. And it could be any types of employers for any types of employees. I mean, Starbucks famously now pays for all of their baristas or whomever can get a college degree at Arizona State University online. Not all of us are Starbucks and have those resources and stuff, but if you think about it, for baristas who probably will work at a workplace for a year or two, right? Now they're going to work at Starbucks for 4 or 5 years. So there's the payoff, right? So maybe this is one thing that you talk about with your supervisor as you come on board, is I'm really keen to continually upskill. What supports can you give for me? I've targeted these 5 things I'd really like to do. I'd like to get certified as a, in project management or whatever else it might be. Can you help me with this? Or maybe that's part of your negotiation when you're taking a job too. So we can steer the boat a little bit. There's more possibilities now at all different price points, which is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also what we often recommend is it's hard to tell, and there still are a lot of employers who are hesitant to hire somebody who doesn't match at least the key pieces of knowledge and experience that they're looking for. But from the applicant's perspective, that access to training is also more available from an individual's perspective, the ability to find either very reduced cost or free online training programs for a variety of skills. We have some skills programs at FlexJobs that FlexJobs members can do skills tests and courses that they can take. There's just lots more available to the individuals as well. So I always recommend people take that under their own control and don't necessarily look for those wonderful employers who are offering training as the only option, but try to get some of those skills so that you can get in the door to maybe some of those employers who are otherwise great, but still haven't picked up on training being a really healthy and important part of their whole workplace. Well, it looks like we are at the top of the hour, so I'm unfortunately going to have to call it a day for everyone here, but I want to give a huge thanks to all of our panelists today. Scott Beason, thank you for writing the book and inspiring the talk. Oscar Gonzalez at USDA, thank you for inspiring so many people. The chat just lit up when you were talking about all the resources and opportunities available at the federal government, government-wide, but also at USDA. Mika Cross for bringing your cross section, and I did not intend that pun, but there you go. It just naturally happened. But cross section of knowledge from so many different areas to kind of tie this all together. And Steve Wynn from Citrix, just wonderful to see what this looks like in practice from an organization that does this so well and has been doing it not just because of the pandemic, but long before that too. In the chat, I am going to put links to all of the resources that were shared by all of the panelists today and the careers pages for USDA and Citrix, as well as links to where you can find Scott's book and also an excerpt, which is, I think, really will resonate with a lot of people. I will include all those links in the email that we send along with the recording and the additional links that were shared throughout the presentation here today in the chat for other resources to find the companies that work this way and are doing it well. But again, thank you all panelists, thank you audience for being here today, and best of luck navigating the future of work, everyone. Take care.